Hello, my name is Reverend Dr. May Elise Cannon. Today is Thursday. It's March 13th, and today is day 524. This is a weekly summary of what's happened in large part over the last week. I did have a fair amount of updates of just the last 24 hours because a lot's been happening. I wanted to start with Syria because there has been quite significant unrest. Chaos swept across coastal Syria as loyalists for the Assad regime um, battled or had conflict with security forces. And it was reported that more than 1,000 people were killed since Thursday of last week. This started late last week. About on Friday, dozens of people were reported killed on that day between Syrian forces of the current government and former supporters of the Assad government that was ousted. And one of the dynamics has to do with the fact that Bashar al-Assad, the former head of Syria, is Alawite. I'll talk about that in a minute. On Friday, it was reported that at least 70 people were killed last week. Dozens were wounded. There were skirmishes. This was particularly in the area of I should know how to pronounce this, Latakia and Tartus. But Latakia is an area that Assad was from, and there are many, many Christians there. And so we'll talk about that in a minute. News outlets reported that scores were killed, and each day after Friday, there were updates, and then the numbers kept increasing. So there were escalations between factions, and one of the main components was many of those involved were a part of the minority group of the Alawites. So again, that's the same group that Bashar Assad and his family came from. The Alawites make up about 12% of the population of Syria. They practice an offshoot of Shia Islam, which first emerged in the 10th century and took hold in Syria after the earliest adherents left and fled Iraq. Alawites' practices are considered different from the main sects of Islam, and there's been discrimination against them in the past. So some of the conversations we've been having about contemporary Syria and a modern state is what does it look like for all people there, all minority groups, Christians, Alawites, and others, to have equality, protection, and the like. Throughout the week in Syria, other news, IDF, the Israeli forces reported 22 Air Force fighter jets attacked on Tuesday dozens of former Assad regime military targets. That was in South Syria. Armed groups killed entire families during the outbreaks of violence. Again, this was targeting predominantly Alawite cities and villages. That was a report from the UN High Commissioner of Human Rights. Witnesses testified that they saw summary executions that took place. So SDF, the Syrian Kurdish-led Syrian Democratic Forces, agreed to integrate with the state government, which was announced by the President Ahmad al-Shara. And this was a landmark deal. This is allowing the current government, it means they're recognizing the Kurdish community in the Northeast, which potentially really could add to peace in the region. So the fact that the Kurdish-led militia in Northeast Syria, they control that area, and the fact that they agreed to merge with the government was a significant move this past week. Armed men attacked a position held by Syria's government security forces in Damascus on Monday. Damascus was supposed to be one of the places that was safe, and particularly safe for Christians and for others. And there were even skirmishes in Damascus. So things have been really, really bad. The Israeli army Monday said it struck military headquarters and sites that housed weapons and equipment in South Syria overnight. And Christians in Syria have said that they're experiencing fear and uncertainty after the more than 1,000 people were killed. Churches for Middle East Peace put out a statement. I'd encourage you to take a look that was echoing a statement that came from the patriarchs of Syria. We said that we stand in solidarity with their voices, speaking out against the escalation of violence, calling for an immediate end to it, calling for peaceful solutions, the dignity of all, the preservation of national unity. And we also talked about what it might look like to build a path to peace that focuses on reconciliation, justice, and the protection of all. I won't go through the specifics of that statement, but wanted to call your attention to it and wanted to encourage you to pray for our brothers and sisters and siblings in Christ and all in the Middle East. Syria just went through 15 years of a civil war, and for Christians to now be saying they feel unsafe and to want to leave is of significant concern. There was an article in Relevant News that talked about those realities that I would call your attention to as well. On Monday, Syria's defense ministry announced it had completed military operations to fight remnants of the Assad forces. And also on Monday, Hassan Abdul Ghani, which is the defense ministry spokesperson for Syria, said that the military operations had come to an end. And so they said that there was now security and stability, but reports that we got from on the ground indicated otherwise. So that's an update just about Syria. Moving on to Gaza, I thought I would start with an update from Oxfam because this is, I think, is a really appropriate summary of where things stand. Oxfam said that after the first phase of the temporary ceasefire in Gaza, which ended on March 1st, there's no agreement in place. Palestinians are facing a massive crisis. Food insecurity throughout the entire Gaza Strip. People have lost their home and their livelihoods. Many urgently need food, water, medicine, safe shelter, and proper sanitation. There have been 59 Israeli captives, both dead and alive, still remain in Gaza under the control of Palestinian armed groups. And to make matters worse, we're now on day 10 or 11 of Israel cutting off fully food, fuel, medicine, humanitarian assistance, and other essential supplies. So prices in Gaza have skyrocketed, and the most vulnerable, but all Gazans, are at even greater risk, threatening the fragile progress aid workers have made over the last 6 weeks since the ceasefire began. Oxfam has a call and a petition for a comprehensive permanent ceasefire. I'd encourage you to sign that and to take a look. On Tuesday of this past week, there was an airstrike in Gaza where 4 people were killed. I just want you to know bombing has resumed. It's not nearly what it was before the ceasefire, but there have been airstrikes that have continued once again in Gaza. Also on Tuesday, 6 people in central and south Gaza were killed. 4 people, including an elderly woman, were killed in the occupied West Bank. On Tuesday, Qatar and Jordan said Israel is aiming to impose starvation on Gaza by tightening its siege and cutting the only remaining power line to the territory, which operates a desalination plant, which of course is used to make water. The official death toll in Gaza is at 48,503. But official numbers say that the number of dead is more than 61,700, as increasing number of Palestinians are found underneath the rubble. Roughly 1,200 people have been killed in Israel. Of course, on October 7th, 2023, there have been other soldiers killed since then, in addition to the 250 taken captive. In the past week, on Monday, hospitals in Gaza received additional bodies of those killed just this past week from Israeli forces. And so on Monday, 9 additional bodies were recovered that were killed recently, and 5 bodies were recovered from underneath the rubble. Over the weekend, there were Israeli airstrikes that killed 2 people. Airstrikes using a drone were reported on Friday. 2 Palestinians were killed in an Israeli attack on North Gaza. Moving to the West Bank, an 18-year-old Israeli civilian was moderately wounded by gunfire in a suspected attack on the settlement of Ariel. I think that was just Wednesday. Security forces, that was yesterday. Security forces, as of last night, were still searching for the assailant. Violence in the West Bank has increased so drastically that since the beginning of October 2023, at least 910 Palestinians have been killed by Israeli soldiers or settlers, and 32 Israelis, including soldiers, have been killed, according to Israeli numbers. Hamas said that the operation in Ariel was theirs in response to Israel's escalation of military action in the West Bank. And then there were injuries reported as settlers stormed Joseph's tomb, which is near Nablus in the West Bank. The Palestinian Red Crescent Society had emergency and ambulance There's a center in Nablus, and they sent crews to respond to a 45-year-old woman who was injured by a sound grenade. They also had cases of tear gas inhalation. They said that a bulldozer and military vehicles stormed the city, aiding settlers who were attacking Joseph's tomb, a monument that contains the remains of Joseph, the viceroy of Egypt. A Palestinian worker also died of injuries after a fall. He had been chased by Israeli forces in East Jerusalem. Rafat Abdulaziz Abdullah Hamad, 35, died of his injuries after being chased by Israeli forces in the old city of Jerusalem. In terms of a ceasefire agreement, the latest news has been that Hamas offered to lay down their weapons. In exchange, they said that they offered a 5 to 10 year truce in their war with Israel. This was negotiated and in conversation with Adam Boehler. He announced this on Sunday. We've not heard yet where that stands. The U.S. has been directly negotiating with Hamas, much to the consternation of Israel. President Trump's hostage affairs envoy, Adam Boehler, reported this in Israel on Sunday. And one of the challenges of what's happening right now is there are lots of negotiations happening at the same time. So Boehler was negotiating specifically about the release of American hostages. And I'll talk about some of the things that have happened since then. Also, the UN humanitarian coordinator for the occupied Palestinian territories, Muhannad Hadi, said on Tuesday, any further delay in Israel's reversal of its block to supply aid and electricity to Gaza will further reverse any progress that was made during the ceasefire. Philippe Lazzarini of UNRWA said that Israel is weaponizing humanitarian aid. So Marco Rubio, our Secretary of State, said on Monday that these negotiations between Hamas and the U.S. are a one-off, that they won't particularly continue. And on Wednesday, it was reported that Steve Witkoff, who's the official U.S. Middle East envoy, met with Arab foreign ministers in Doha, who agreed to continue coordination with him, specifically as it relates to the application or implementation of Egypt's plan for Gaza's reconstruction, which of course has not been officially agreed to by either the U.S. or Israel. But for the Arab states to be willing to meet with Steve Witkoff is significant. Now, it was just reported today that he went to Russia, and so he's not only working on the Middle East. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu held a security assessment meeting with the IDF Chief of Staff, Mossad and Shin Bet, on Wednesday amid talks in Doha. So there's also negotiations happening in Doha right now. I want to talk to you about something that happened that's very detailed. I'm sorry, but it's so important in Israel. There was a major shift in the Israeli Defense Forces that's happened over the last couple of weeks. It was implemented this last week. The chief of staff for the Israeli Defense Forces just shifted. Oh, I'm not to that point of the update yet. I want to skip ahead and then I'm going to get totally lost by doing this. But so last week this happened. There was a storm over the ousting of the spokesperson, Brigadier General Daniel Hagari. So Brigadier General Hagari was the head of the IDF. The new chief of staff is a guy named Eyal Zamir, and he is calling for an extensive assault on Hamas in the Gaza Strip. He's accelerating plans. The IDF soldiers have been on the Gaza border the last couple of weeks. They've been preparing to re-enter Gaza. Zamir is convinced if he gets the green light, he's ready to go. The two things he's waiting for are progress over negotiations, which we've not yet seen. We don't really know where they are. And the second thing is, what's President Donald Trump going to say? So Thursday was Zamir's first day in office, a week ago today, and this was the plan that was discussed. The plan involved several divisions inside of the Gaza Strip of the IDF, the remobilization of tens of thousands of Israeli reservists. The objective would be an aggressive, extensive assault across the entire front aimed at hitting Hamas's military infrastructure, the existing one and the one being rebuilt. The civilian population would be moved to secure areas. We know what happened before when that happened. The secure areas were bombed. That's what I'm referring to. But Israel itself would manage the distribution of aid shipments. This is abhorrent. Right now, Israel is responsible for distributing aid, and they've completely shut it all off. So I just want you to know how horrible this would be if it's implemented. On the other side, there's accumulating evidence that Hamas is reorganizing. Hamas is wielding civilian and military control. They're being very, very public. They're demonstrative in their presence in the streets. They're policing. Now, there was no police. I mean, when there was an Israeli military presence in Gaza, there was increased chaos. And so, there's control in Gaza by Hamas, but they're being very, very public about it. And so it's also reported they're resetting booby traps and buildings across the entire enclave, and they are taking out explosives from unexploded bombs dropping by the Israeli Air Force during the war. So I'm sorry, I read that a little bit out of order. I had a couple of other updates. I wanted to be sure to let you know. A Palestinian source told Sky News in Arabic that the U.S. proposed to Hamas to release 10 living hostages in exchange for extending the Gaza ceasefire by 2 months. So part of what's happening, it feels a little bit to me like it's a dartboard, and it's like, which dart is going to hit the bullseye, right? Because there have been, release all the hostages, released half the hostages. This came from the hostage negotiations between the U.S. and Hamas. A Palestinian source reported that the U.S. proposed 10 living hostages. It would include one American, not all of the Americans, in exchange for extending the ceasefire by 2 months. We don't know that anything happened with that. Hamas said there was positive indicators for negotiations. Israel denied it, but Israel's very upset that the U.S. is negotiating directly. Last Friday, we also know that a deal was discussed with Hamas negotiators, that was specifically about releasing all of the U.S. hostages in exchange for a 2-month extension of the ceasefire. We also know that the Israeli military created an artificial intelligence tool that is similar to ChatGPT, and they're using this to collect vast collections of Palestinian surveillance data. This AI model is designed to analyze intercepted communications, but experts say such systems can exacerbate biases and they are prone to making mistakes. This is coming from a report from 972 magazine. And the Hebrew language outlet called Local Call. They found that Unit 8200 trained an AI model to understand spoken Arabic and used volumes of telephone conversations and text messages obtained through extensive surveillance of the occupied territories. Also, and I really know, this was not reported in the US, last Friday in Hebrew media and in Israeli media, it was reported that the defense minister of Israel, Katz, instructed the army to allow protest ships to arrive in Gaza. They would disembark demonstrators inside of Gaza, and then the ships would be seized by the Israeli military. They would be transferred to Ashdod, the city in Israel just north of Gaza, so that Israel could use them to evacuate Gaza residents interested in emigrating from Gaza. Katz said whoever comes to protest on the shores of Gaza will send them to Gaza to use the ships to evacuate residents who wish to leave. There were a few updates from Lebanon this week. One person was killed by the Israeli army as the army struck what they said was a Hezbollah militant in South Lebanon. Israel continues to occupy South Lebanon. The World Bank estimated reconstruction of Lebanon to cost about $11 billion. The Lebanese army said that Israelis are visiting a site in Lebanon that violates the country's sovereignty. And so that was in the news this week. And then there was quite a bit about the U.S. President Trump had written a letter to Iran's Supreme Leader, Khamenei, to seek a new deal with Tehran to restrain its rapidly advancing nuclear program. The Ayatollah responded and said that the U.S. would not be able to stop Iran if they wanted to produce nuclear weapons. The Houthis, which have been redesignated as a terrorist group by the U.S., have said that they will attack any Israeli vessel that travels through waters outside of Yemen. They are now a target. And Trump backed up and said that no one is expelling any Palestinians. So he's backed up from his initial Gaza plan. Also, I wanted to let you know the Heritage Foundation, a major conservative think tank, has recommended cutting military aid to Israel by 2047. This was huge news. Also significant was the activist Mahmoud Khalil was arrested. He was a student at Columbia. Has a green card on Wednesday. Just yesterday, there was a hearing. ICE He was arrested, is being detained in Louisiana. There was a hearing yesterday where a federal judge said he cannot be removed from the United States, and there will be, more of a hearing. So late last night, it was reported that he will remain in an ICE detention facility in Louisiana following yesterday's hearing, and there are attempts to move that location. And it's a huge deal. I mean, he had a green card, and the Trump administration said that they have the right to revoke his green card. Department of Justice attorneys said that they're attempting to move the proceedings. The case, seemingly the first of its kind, sets the stage for what could become the Trump administration's targeting of, they already are targeting foreign students and pro-Palestinian demonstrations on college campuses. Pope Francis is increasingly stable. We continue for prayers in that regard. This next week is our advocacy summit at Churches for Middle East Peace. And this week, we've been particularly grateful for members of the Sisters of Mercy, which is Churches for Middle East Peace's first women religious of Catholic sisters, as this week is Catholic Sisters Week of 2025. So we celebrate religious sisters around the world. I'll stop there. Lord have mercy, Christ have mercy. So that is an update of the news from the past week.